A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari and I hope that all must be doing great. So in this video, we'll be analyzing different newspapers from the perspective of the importance of the articles for the UPSC Civil Services examination. And today we'll be analyzing it for the 20th of March 2023. So we'll be looking into some topics like decisions on the indices are transparent by the National Stock Exchange because of the Adani stocks issue. And secondly, will be BARC insights on column tops, the radiation charts. So we'll be looking into that. And UBS is going to take over the Credit Suisse Bank. And obviously, this was one of the fallouts of the failure of the SVB Bank. Fourthly, we'll be seeing India-China ties, slow steps to finding the border tranquility. So the bar is much higher now. So that's there. So Amritpal Singh is elusive. Police arrest 34 more followers. So the system is on alert and they're trying to arrest this person, Amritpal Singh. So mobile internet services, they will remain suspended till noon in Punjab, and that is to prevent any incitement to violence through social media, through bulk messaging. And for people, they have been arrested from and they've been taken to Assam jail for reasons of security. So that is the update as of now. Moving forward. So here we don't have anything important. Let's move forward. Coming to the editorials, so talking about India, China, and the border issue. So India and China, they appear to be moving towards a new modus vivendi to maintain peace and tranquility along their disputed 4,000-kilometer of border. So in 2020, the older arrangements, which were shaped by the agreements of 1993, 1996, 2005, and 2013, they came apart in Ladakh after the Chinese massed troops in Tibet. They established blockades at 6 points on the line of actual control to prevent the Indian troops from patrolling the border. So we know about the issue which is going on in eastern Ladakh with China, and then we had clash at Galwan in June 2020, which led to the deaths of 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers. So this is a first such losses on the LSE since 1975. And the Sino-Indian clash, here Sino is being referred to China, so we use the word Sino. So Sino-Indian clash in December 2022 at Yangtze. It is in the northeast of Tawang, which is in Arunachal Pradesh. It suggests that new measures, they may be needed across the LSE and not just in Ladakh. So we are seeing disturbances in different states where we're sharing a border with China. So it is not just in Ladakh, but across the LSE, we need to take some new measures in order to ensure that such instances they are not repeated in future, and we maintain the safety and security of the people residing in the border areas. So what are the attempts to ease the border situation? So there are reported to have been important discussions that took place, and that is like one of the updates we are into bilateral talks to address the situation at border, and we have the Ministry of External Affairs which is involved. Apart from that, in the last 3 years, through the patient negotiations, the two sides, they have managed to disengage in 4 of the 6 points. So they were in Galwan, Pangong So, Gogra Post, and near the Jianan Pass. So you need to look at the locations of all these places. But two key areas, they remain unsettled. That is the Depsang Pulj and the Charding Ninglong Junction, which is there in the Demchuk area, involving nearly 1,000 square kilometers. So these two places are also important. So the Indian press release after the meeting said that proposals for the disengagement in the remaining areas, they were discussed in an open and constructive manner, which could create conditions for restoration of normalcy in the bilateral relations as well. So the Chinese release, which was slightly more forthcoming, spoke of the achievements made in the disengagement of the border troops of the two countries at 4 locations, including the Galwan Valley. And that is the one measure that we have taken. We have engaged into talks so as to ease the situation. So considering the no patrol zones, so it is likely that the no patrol zones, they could be confined to the places where the two sides have overlapping claims. So till 2020, both the sides, they patrolled till the limit of these contending claims, and there was a protocol that if the two patrols met, so they would stop and they will display the banners to ask the other side to go back to their own area. So this was the agreement. Thereafter, we saw that the issue was dealt with through meetings at one of the five designated border meeting points. So, in an article in an Indian publication in 2020, Chinese journalist suggested that the concept of zone of actual control could replace the line of actual control in some areas that had no obvious geomorphical features or the population. So, other areas, they too could be delimited as a border belt if they did not require population adjustment. So, this is just a suggestion. Moving forward, so shifting the goalpost, so just to which basically points the Chinese exercised control in the West at that time or even now, there has never been clear as no detailed maps they have been ever made available. And that has been at the root of the problem. So that is one thing. And over the years, the Chinese, they have been able to shift their goalpost at their own will, their unilateral will, I should say. So especially in relation to the Ladakh border. And despite tensions, Indian and Chinese ministers and officials, they have been meeting with each other regularly. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met his Chinese counterpart earlier this month on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meet in New Delhi. And even in March 2022, we saw the Mr. Kim's predecessor ostensibly to discuss the issues relating to Ukraine in New Delhi. So we have been meeting. So diplomatically, we are engaged with each other. And in 2014-15, Prime Minister Modi, he tried his level best to persuade the Chinese to clarify the LAC at the points where there were differences. So the Chinese, they ignored his proposals, and even since 2020, they have destroyed the trust that was built up with patience between 1993 and 2020. So the bar for normality in India-China relations is now much higher. So talking about stagflation, firstly, it's important to have clarity about what do we mean by this term stagflation. So it is a combination of two words, stagnation and inflation. So when we are experiencing stagnation in terms of economic growth, we're not having much more jobs opportunities. And basically we can say when unemployment is rising, that is we are referring to stagflation. And obviously inflation, we know when the general price level that is increasing. So when we are experiencing higher amount of unemployment and at the same time high inflation, that is the situation what we call as stagflation. So we are seeing high credit cost. That is obviously because of the tight monetary policy, interest rates are being raised. So that is leading to higher credit cost or higher borrowing cost. So that may further dampen the consumption. Obviously it would, because the credit cost has increased and it would be impacting the investment as well. So the latest global financial developments that we have seen over the past few weeks and the recent economic data in India, they are together raising fears that several major economies worldwide, including India's, may be headed for a spell of debilitating stagflation. So these are the new concerns, new fears that have emerged because of certain global financial developments and their impacts worldwide. So last week's retail inflation reading for Feb from India's NSO, it was at 6.44%, which clearly belies the RBI's more recent forecast for Q4 inflation of 5.7%. So with January having logged CPI-based price gains of 6.52%, prices they will have to softened so sharply in March as to drag the headline number down by more than 230 basis points to about 4.1%. But the problem that we are seeing is the sticky core inflation, and the numbers, they are not moving much. So that is the concern. And core inflation, it remains persistently elevated despite RBI having raised its benchmark interest rate, that is repo rate, by 250 basis points since last May. It reveals the difficulty the monetary authorities, they are facing in tamping down on the price gains by increasing the credit cost so as to dampen the demand. So as I have like repeated this thing before, as well, that because of the tight monetary policy, because of even like increase in the repo rate by 250 basis points, that is why 2.5% since last May, we have not seen much relief at the inflation front. We have not seen much, cooling down of the CPI inflation. So that is a concern. Then what else is the solution if the tight monetary policy is not helping us? So whether the fiscal policy, the combination of a fiscal policy and a tight monetary policy can help. And obviously, tight monetary policy is impacting the consumption demand, which ultimately affects the growth rate. So the RBI Governor Shaktikant Das and RBI's two other members of the Monetary Policy Committee, they have cited the worrying persistence of core inflation at their last policy meeting, which was there in Feb, as justification for deciding to continue tightening monetary policy. So basically, we are again expecting an increase in the repo rate, because even the last monetary policy committee and monetary policy committee is meeting because of the high persistence of the core inflation. Few of the MPC members and even the RBI governor said that this is the reason why basically they can increase the repo rate in future as well. So there's no change in stance and there's no change in beliefs as of now. So that is the thing. And in this context, we have discussed that it is important for India to decouple its monetary policy from the USA's, because right now we see there is very strong linkage between the two. So it is important to take into consideration the demands, the needs of Indian economy, and how things are different in India from USA. So that is important, and not just completely having a very strong linkage with the US monetary policy. So that there, and apart from that, prices of four key categories in the food basket that together account for more than a fifth of the consumer price index, that has continued to register significantly high year-on-year inflation as well as a sequential hardening. And if the key staple of the cereals, that is wheat and the products, they saw inflation accelerate to 16.7% in Feb. We saw the headline reading for the milk and the products quickened to around 9.65%. And that for fruits, it has also surged, with only the reading for the spices slowing to a tad. So we are seeing we can say collaboratively that there is high food inflation, there is high cereal inflation. We have been looking at how the wheat prices, they've been increasing, what are the two main reasons behind that, and then we are seeing increase in the prices of fruits also. So these are the things here, and obviously this is driving up the headline inflation. And now with the prediction of a likely El Nino this year, the outlook for the food prices, that is hardly reassuring. So obviously it could be possible that if we have an El Nino this year, which we are obviously expecting, then it could further drive up the food prices. So the policymakers will, and therefore that needs to stay focused on containing the inflation, the rising uncertainty about the growth momentum sustaining in the face of the heightened risk of recession in the advanced economies. That raises the risk that high credit cost may further dampen the consumption. So given these things, that we expect a recession in the advanced countries this year, and obviously now because of the current global financial situation, we are expecting that the advanced countries may be hit by recession very soon. So given that scenario, and then again a higher borrowing cost, that can further dampen the consumption and ultimately affect the GDP growth level. So yet failure to engender the enduring price stability, that could lead to stagflation. And because of this, we can see stagflation in India. So, unless the supply side measures such as the GST rationalization and the fuel prices cuts, they are expedited, the overall macroeconomic outlook that appears worrying right now. So, we need to take into consideration the supply side measures, and two of them are mentioned that we can go ahead with GST rationalization of the rates, and fuel price cuts can help in reducing down the inflation, and there wouldn't be a need to continue with the tight monetary policy. Hence, it would not impact the GDP growth rate, and it would be possible that we might be having a softer form of stagflation. So, in this article, moving forward with a newer concept of UHC. So, do we believe in health as a basic human right, which the India's constitution guarantees under right to life? Do we believe in that or not is a question. So, in contrast, we believe in the World Health Organization's definition of health, that is a certain totality of health to the realms of the mental and the social well-being and happiness beyond physical fitness and an absence of disease and disability. So this is the definition of health, what is provided by WHO, that it is not just your, physical fitness, but there are elements like your mental health, your social well-being, and absence of diseases and disability. How happy are you? So that's how you can define health in simple terms. So this means that we cannot achieve health in its wider definition without addressing the health determinants. So this necessitates a need for an intersectoral convergence beyond the medical and the health department, such as we can take into consideration women and child development, food and nutrition, agriculture and animal husbandry, civil supplies, rural water supply, sanitation, social welfare, tribal welfare, education, and forestry. So all these factors, if we address the challenges, the problems, and the difficulties in these diverse areas, so we can definitely lead to good health of the people. So a focus on the primary care. So when and where did the partial coverage of the population, the partial responsibility of the ruling government to pay for healthcare come in? So the International Conference on the Primary Healthcare, which is at the Alma Ata in 1978, we listed 8 components of the minimum care for all these citizens, and it mandated all the health promotion activities, the prevention of diseases, including vaccinations and treatment of the minor illnesses and accidents, to be free for all using the government resources, especially for the poor. So that is one thing. So it must encompass primary, secondary, and tertiary care for all who need it and at affordable cost without discrimination. So here we're talking about the universal health care or universal health coverage. So these two components, they're important, that we need to include all the 3 tiers, primary, secondary, and tertiary, and the cost needs to be affordable. So realizing that even the poor do contract chronic illnesses and non-communicable diseases such as cardiac, neural, mental, and metabolic disorders, they also require investigations and management at peripheral primary health institutions, and which is primary healthcare in India. And so we can't leave, obviously, we can't leave the poor population. So every individual has a right to be healed and not have complications, disability, and death. So that right is guaranteed only by individualism in public health and the new global approach to universal health coverage, where nobody is left uncounted and uncared for. So there is the Astana Declaration of 2018. It calls for partnership with the private sector, though alcohol, tobacco, ultra-processed foods, and industrial and automobile pollution contributed by the commercial private sector, they are well established. We also see that also poorer countries, they miserably fail and they're unwilling for the private sector regulation. So it never addressed poverty, unemployment, poor livelihood, but it eulogizes the quality PHC and only as the cornerstone for the universal health coverage, and it ignores the broader universal health care. So although we can take basically the private sector, but again, as we saw that in these diverse areas, private sector's main motive is to just earn profit and not public good. So the primary interest for them is to earn huge amounts of profits. So the National Health Mission, with the concurrent intersectoral threats on the Poshan Abhiyan, the National Food Security, and the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, water sanitation, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, etc. That is it's a better model of fully tax-funded universal healthcare. But the Ayushman Bharat Jan Arogya Bhim Yojana damages that approach. So as per VDM, which is a Sweden-based institute, so it says that India's democratic values, they have eroded significantly. And yesterday we saw this thing even in one of the articles. So the debate around India's erosion of the democratic values, that has surfaced again after Congress leader Rahul Gandhi's remarks in the UK. So talking about and analyzing different indicators when we are analyzing the situation around the barometers of democracy in India. So the charts, they are based on data from the VDM, which is Varieties of Democracy Institute, which is at Sweden's university. So chart 1 depicts 5 indices which are used by VDM to capture democratic values in India. So the basically the factors or the indexes that they have computed includes the Liberal Democracy Index, Electoral Democracy, Deliberative Democracy, Participative Democracy, and Egalitarian Democracy. So you can see over a time period, all these 5 indicators, you can see how they are falling, the value is falling. Coming to chart 3, the chart 3, it shows that the press freedom, it has eroded in India in recent years. So for press freedom, it has taken into consideration media bias, critical print or broadcast media, government censorship efforts, and then harassment of journalists. So all of that is, in a way, it is falling from the higher and earlier levels. Then chart 2 is talking about the indexes, which measures the change in digital society variables over time. So it is analyzing things at different fronts like government internet shutdown in practice, arrest for the political content, government internet filtering in practice, and dissemination of false information internally by the government. So that is one thing. So when we have a look at the government internet shutdown in practice, so those instances, they have increased, and that is the thing. So chart 4, it plots the liberal democracy index in 2014 and 2022 of various countries. So the liberal democracy index, so the blue dots are the countries which recorded increases in the democratic value. So it includes South Korea, Seychelles, Gambia, and red ones would be obviously the nations whose values have eroded. So India, Hong Kong, Afghanistan, Tunisia, Brazil, and Poland are few of the countries. But one thing that we need to keep in mind is that it is not as per the basically by a domestic institute or domestic university in India. So it is obviously there might be some bias as well in this data or analysis. So access to facilities and the basic IT skills. So recently released study which was titled Multiple Indicator Survey as per the NSS 78th round report, which was conducted between 2020 and 21, it showed that in India around 33% they had to walk outside the premises for drinking water, which is a similar share was using unclean fuel to cook food. And then the survey results, they also showed that only 5% of the households they had access to air conditioners, and similar share can use the basic formula in the spreadsheets. So even we have the data here for different states. So it is there for distance to water, unclean fuel, over 33% of the households are using it, persons in debt. So in India, over 15,000 persons per lakh were indebted to some institutional or non-institutional agency. And here we have like southern states, they stood out when it came to indebtedness, with Andhra Pradesh having the highest number of indebted persons per lakh. Then copying and moving, so close to 25% of Indians, they had the ability to copy and move a file or a folder. So basically their IT skills. Then number of people in search of jobs. So for about 13.7% of the people who were willing to move out from their present place of residence in India, the main reason was the search for employment. Then their AC positions, so we have seen only 5%, and then their spreadsheet skills. So the amount invested by the foreign portfolio investors in Indian equities till 17th of March. So this is basically around 11,495 crore rupees, and this was driven by the bulk investment from the US based GQG partners in the Adani Group companies. So majorly it was in the Adani Group of companies, and foreign portfolio investors, they may take a cautious stance in their approach following the collapse of the US based banks right now. So that can obviously drive the interest and sentiments of the investors. So what is late life depression? So the geriatric depression, it has three risk factors: biological, psychological, and social. So for treatment experts, they take a four-pronged approach which involves psychotherapy, there is medications, brain stimulations, and family therapy. So, is depression more difficult to treat in old age? So, that is what the late life depression we are addressing here. So, that is caused by multiple factors working together, and it has three broad risk factors: biological, psychological, and social. So, what are the biological risk factors? So, scientists they are yet to identify a candidate biomarker, which is a biological molecule in blood, body fluids, or other tissues that is a sign of disease process for this the late life depression. So, on the other hand, studies they have also found some evidence for the genetic contribution to the late life depression. So, genetic factors are also there. So stress that accumulates over one's life, it leads to a sustained secretion of cortisol, which is the hormone that regulates the body's stress response. And increased cortisol levels, it leads to the loss of brain cells in the hippocampus, which is implicated in memory and learning. So this brain cell loss can be partially mitigated by the use of antidepressants. So, talking about the psychological risk factors, so personality attributes, they may color the origin and expression of the depressive symptoms in the older adults. And here, the risk factors can be the depressed individuals may they overreact to life events or misinterpret them. So, some of the adverse life events like loss of a job, they are more frequently reported among the depressed elderly people than among the non-depressed older adults. So loss of control refers to locus of control, it refers to the degree to which an individual feels a sense of agency in their life. So that is one thing. And what are the social risk factors? So lower socioeconomic status that has been associated with depression across the life cycle, and the construct of the social support includes perception, structure of social network, and the tangible help and the assistance available. These are some of the factors, and obviously the role of family is, I would say, the most important one. Moving forward, so amid heat over the Adani stocks, NSE says all its decisions are transparent. So the National Stock Exchange, in a statement, defends its indexing and surveillance moves, says there is no human discretion in deciding on inclusion or exclusion of stocks in any of its indices. So NSE says that its surveillance actions on individual stocks and decisions to include or exclude the stocks in various nifty indices, they are driven by transparent policies and rules without any human discretion. So we know that the National Stock Exchange, we have the index, which is Nifty 50. So it comprises of 50 best performing companies, which shows the entire, we can say, which gives us an idea about the entire performance of the stock market. And then we also have the BSE index, Bombay Stock Exchange, which comprises of 30 companies. So recently we saw that NSE, it removed three Adani group of companies, which includes its flagship Adani Enterprises from its short-term additional surveillance framework, and stocks they are put under additional surveillance framework by exchanges to safeguard investors amid the high volatility. So that has been now removed, and NSE statement also sought to defend its subsidiary NSE Indices decisions and said there was no human discretion in deciding on inclusion or exclusion of stocks. So NSE says that all this is done in a very transparent manner without any human discretion. So we are seeing crude prices they slump, and which is a boost for the oil firms and not the consumers. So we see with the global crude oil prices, they now slipping below $75 per barrel. Last week, Indian oil marketing companies, they are now making a profit of rupees 11.1 per liter on diesel and 8.7 rupees per liter on petrol. But consumers, they are hoping for a price cut amid high inflation. They are unlikely to get any relief soon. So basically, this is benefiting the oil firms and not the consumers. However, it should have been that this reduction in the crude oil prices should have been translated to the consumers also, because even the consumers, they are feeling the brunt of higher inflation. So Japan's Prime Minister Kishida is going to visit India today. So G7, G20 Indo-Pacific ties are on the agenda. G7, G20 and Indo-Pacific ties. And we'll be also looking into some of the bilateral issues. So So that would be regarding investments in India, connectivity projects in the Northeast, and much delayed Shinkansen high-speed rail project. And sources said that the two sides, they would also outlook India-Japan cooperation under their special strategic and global partnership over the free and open Indo-Pacific, which will be outlined by Mr. Kishida during his Sapru House lecture later in the day. So Confluence of the Seas, a speech to the Indian Parliament in 2007 was made by Shinzo Abe, and he looks forward to discussing the future of the Indo-Pacific with the people of India on this occasion of his visit to India. And he will also visit the Buddha Jayanti Park and see the Bal Bodhi tree, which is believed to be connected to Mahatma Bodhi tree that Gautam Buddha attained enlightenment under. So the tree grew from a sapling presented by the former Sri Lanka's Prime Minister, and it was planted by former Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri in 1964. So we'll be visiting that place also. So background radiation is higher in Kerala, but there's no risk as per a study. So higher radiation levels in Kollam, they are attributed to monazite sands that are high in thorium. So study found that average natural background levels of the gamma radiations in India was 94 NGY per hour. So that is there. So we need to look at where else in India we get monazite sands apart from Kerala. So in parts of Kerala, background radiation levels or that emitted from the natural sources such as rocks, sand, or mountains, they are nearly 3 times more than what's been assumed. And this is as per a pan-India study by the scientists at the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, which is BARC. So they have found out. So when we talk about the background radiation, so that includes radiation from natural sources like rock, sand, and mountains. So right now, it is not like very risky. So radiation results from the disintegrating nucleus of an unstable element, and these can be from anywhere, including from inside our bodies to the constituents of the matter. So gamma rays, they are a kind of radiation that can pass unobstructed through matter. Though extremely energetic, they are harmless unless present in large concentrated doses. So it's similar to heat from a fire, feeling pleasant unless a sustained concentrated burst can scald, or worse, it can ignite. So especially around the nuclear plants, we see gamma radiation levels, they are monitored, as also the average quantity of radiation that plant workers they are exposed to. So even in that case, the gamma radiations are monitored. So the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is obviously a UN body, it specifies maximum radiation exposure levels, and this has also been adopted by India's atomic energy establishments. So public exposure, it should not exceed 1 millisievert every year. Those who work in plants, or they are by virtue of their occupation, they shouldn't be exposed to over 30 millisievert every year. So these are the levels which are given by the International Atomic Energy Agency. These are the safety levels. So this basically does not mean that those at Kolam, they are being exposed to higher or dangerous level of radiations. And there have been extensive studies in the past that have checked for higher rates of cancer or mortality. And higher radiation levels in columns, they are attributed to the monazite sands that are high in thorium. And this, for many years, is part of India's long-term plan to sustainably produce nuclear fuel. So in southern India, because of the presence of granite and basaltic volcanic rock, it has higher levels of radiation from uranium deposits. Again, we saw a 6.8 magnitude of earthquake in Ecuador and Peru, which kills 15 people. So we are seeing higher instances of earthquakes in different countries. So strong earthquake that shock the southern Ecuador and northern Peru. They are on a Saturday killed 15 people, trapping others under the rubble. And we saw a 6.8 strong quake was centered just off the Pacific coast, about 80 kilometers south of Ecuador's second largest city. So in this context, basically, India is also highly susceptible to earthquakes, specifically northern India. So one of the solutions that we talked about was focusing and giving much more importance to the local construction techniques, and that can play an important role in this case. And apart from that, we have other general measures which we talk about the mock drills. We need to have proper plan. We need to make people aware how to deal with the situation if there is an earthquake. So these are some of the general points, but one of the most important ones that we discussed was giving importance and giving recognition and using the local construction techniques in future, so that basically loss of life is avoided in future if there is any instance in India also. So Putin, he visits Mariupol, which is his first trip, which was obviously an occupied territory in Ukraine by Russia. So the visit comes ahead of Xi Jinping's trip to Moscow this week. So Kremlin calls Putin's Mariupol visit spontaneous, and Kyiv asks action. It shows lack of remorse from the Russian leader. So the two rivals, UBS and Credit Suisse, now UBS Bank is going to acquire its rival Credit Suisse, and this was basically we saw the situation of Credit Suisse, that is because of failure of the Silicon Valley Bank. So the banking giant UBS is buying its smaller rival Credit Suisse in an effort to avoid further market shaking turmoil in global banking. And the value of the deal has not been specified, but it called the announcement one of the great breadth for the stability of international finance. And an uncontrolled collapse of Credit Suisse would lead to incalculable consequences for the country and the international financial system. So right now, the global financial situation is not that stable or not that confident for the investors and even for the depositors. Coming to Mint, so in 5 charts, we'll be looking at how war fed Indo-Russia trade. Basically, we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, how that helped into or how that led to changing of the trade between India and Russia. So India's imports from Russia touched new highs this fiscal year and exports they stayed tapered. But imports, you can see the share, how that has increased massively. So that is not even comparable to the earlier figures, but that is majorly the oil imports that surged from Russia into India. Secondly, the crude imports, the sizzle, and the export of agricultural products that also witnessed a rise. So, in terms of the manufactured goods, in the exports, you can see they have that has reduced in manufactured goods, and then in agricultural and allied products that has increased. Ores and minerals, even that has increased. Then petroleum and crude, there's not much change. Here we're talking about the exports from India to Russia, and imports definitely they have increased when we're talking about petroleum and crude oil. So massively is that only from 25 to 75%. The petroleum and crude imports they have increased from Russia. So cheaper crude oil that has dominated India's imports from Russia from 25% in the preceding 6 years, that is between 2017 to 2022. Its share in India's import basket from Russia, it has risen to 73%, making Russia the third largest supplier of petroleum and crude products to India, which was earlier at ninth place. And over 85% of the demand for petroleum products they are being met by imports in India, and experts point out that apart from the better pricing, the Russian tilt is also part of India's moves to reduce the oil dependence from West Asia. So that would be also basically a step towards diversification of our crude oil partners. And talking about the non-crude growth, so in which all sectors we saw a growth in terms of trade. So we saw diversification in terms of fertilizers, vegetable oil, coal sector, ores, and spices. So the highest one is registered for fertilizers, followed by coal, ores, vegetable oil, and spices. So the way forward, so at a time of a divided world order, the most Western nations isolating Russia, they has India's policy of diplomatic moderation and non-alignment helped it avoid the worst of itself? So that's a question. And in terms of our energy security, it has definitely helped India. That has avoided a very difficult situation, given that we are so like import dependent, not just for the crude oil, but even products like oil seeds and fertilizers. And obviously, initially we saw that the fertilizers prices even they increased sharply. So there has been respect shown to the fact that India has taken its own political decision about how to deal with Russia, and so we are not seeing any bias in terms of trade with other countries. So India's unique position presents an opportunity to shore up trade and services can be a sweet spot. So with the goods related supply chain disruptions unlikely to end anytime soon, Ray feels India must focus on improving services exports since there is potential in that. So when we talk about services exports from India, so we fare very nicely when it comes to that, and India can utilize its potential in services exports when we're talking about the trade with Russia. So coming to Financial Express now, let's see what else is missing and that we have to discuss. So the norms regarding the non-personal data sharing, it is in works. So we'll be having norms regarding this also. So this is all related to data management, and commercial usage by companies is in focus. So firms, they are to be barred from using their own standards, because now we'll be having, or the government is working upon common standards which needs to be followed by everyone. So there's a perception that if we can do this right, it will be a gold standard of data sets. So the government intends to spell out the definition of what would be there under the non-personal data or the anonymized data. And center is working on Digital India Act apart from the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, and firms hence they will not be free to just remove the name of the users from any data set, make it anonymous and use it for any commercial purpose. So that wouldn't be allowed so easily. So that is the update, and BIS hallmarking soon to curb substandard imports. So 250 to 300 items are on the list, and local players are going to benefit because of this. So cigarette lighters, pens, and household electrical items, they are some of the products that would be bound by the new norms. And an import duty hike on these items is not being planned as of now, but we are focusing upon their quality. So these are some of the non-tariff measures. So we see that in the financial year 2023, the fiscal deficit target of 6.4% is within the reach. So Central will rein in the fiscal deficit at the targeted 6.4% of the GDP in the current financial year, despite some likely variations in the revenues and the expenditures from the respective revised estimates. And this is as per the Economic Affairs Secretary, Ajay said. And he said that a 6.5% economic growth next year appears to be likely and reasonable, and any adverse impact of the banking crisis in the advanced economies on India by way of capital outflows would be manageable thanks to the strong forex reserves that India has. So if even that's how things unfold in future in the form of huge amount of capital outflow. So we have strong forex reserves. So bilateral trade in rupee is going to gather pace soon. So in this context, we have talked about the wash accounts, and this is also a step in the direction for internationalization of rupee. So we are seeing rising volume, and majorly we are taking this specifically with Russia as of now, and obviously more and more countries are joining us in rupee-based trade. So approvals they have been granted by RBI to domestic and the foreign authorized dealer banks in 60 cases for the opening the special rupee washro accounts of the correspondent banks from 18 countries. So these washro accounts would be opened up in India, and increased bilateral transactions in the rupee will save in currency conversion fees for traders also. And obviously, this would be reducing our dependence upon US dollar and also preventing us from the fluctuations that we see. So government is planning to link the fertilizer subsidy to the land holding, and this is going to be a pilot project in 7 districts very soon. So subsidy amount over the years, when we try to understand the trend. So from 2019 to 2020, the fertilizer subsidy has been steadily increasing up till 2022-23, and for the next year, it is just a budget estimate. So we can say that overall it has been an rising trend when we talk about the fertilizer subsidy. So when the subsidy amount would be linked to the land holding, basically it would be much more rational and efficient. And direct cash transfers proposal, they are put in a ban. So there wouldn't be any direct cash transfers as of now. So the government will roll out a modified direct benefit transfer scheme of fertilizers in 7 districts across many states on pilot basis. And under these new plans, the sales of the subsidized fertilizers to the farmers that will be capped, taking into consideration their land holding. So on that basis, basically government is planning for a fertilizer subsidy. So we are seeing E-commerce activity is rising, so India can hit $350 billion of exports via e-commerce by 2030, as per a report. So, do we need a separate policy regarding this? Definitely, we need, in order to regulate the activities and ensure that they are happening in free and fair manner and transparent manner, and there is no basically any illegal activity through that. So government needs to address the pain points of the sector by taking steps by formulating a separate policy regarding e-commerce. And currently e-commerce exports, they account for $2 billion, which is less than 0.5% of the country's total goods export basket. So but we are expecting it can, like, exponentially it can increase by 2030. So calibrating inflation with growth. So trade policy solutions, not the monetary policy action, will tame food inflation. So since we were talking about that, even despite a tight monetary policy and increase in repo rate by 2.5% since last May, we are not seeing the food inflation or even the CPI coming down. So then what else is the solution if not the tight monetary policy? So here this article is saying that trade policy solutions can help. Basically, the supply side steps, they can help us in reducing the food inflation. So calibrating it with growth is important. So the import duty on the skimmed milk powder is 60% plus the 10% farm infra development says. Then Indian SMP prices that shoe much above the global prices, and bringing it down to 15% could augment the supply of milk in the country and keep a lid on the consumer prices of milk. So when we are talking about the supply side steps, so basically we are ensuring that we need to increase the supply so that the food inflation, at least the food inflation, comes down. That would be helping us in reducing the headline inflation. So as of financial year 2023 comes to a close, India can feel proud that it will be clocking the highest rate of economic growth amongst the G20 countries. So that is one of the achievements we can say. And the GDP growth may be between 6.8% to 7% as predicted by RBI and Ministry of Finance. So that's almost double the so-called Hindu rate of growth of 3.5% that Raghurajam So, he is the former governor of RBI, recently said that India was dangerously close to Hindu rate of growth in the upcoming times. So the term Hindu rate of growth, it was coined by the teacher, the author's teacher, who is Ashok Gulati. So the teacher is Raj Krishna at the Delhi School of Economics, indicating that Indian economy moved at its own pace of about 3.5% during 1947 to 1980, or as no matter which government ruled. But this trajectory, it has changed since the economic reforms of 1991. Obviously, that is very clear. And over the last 2 decades, India registered a robust growth of more than 6.5%. And chances are that it will continue to grow roughly at that pace for another decade or so. But the concern is that the inflation front, so India is still not out of the woods, and the consumer price index inflation in Feb was 6.44%, which is a notch higher than the upper end of the RBI's tolerance band, which is between 2% to 6%. So still it is above 6%. So it is worth noting that inflation is now widely spread across various commodity groups, be it fuel prices, lightning, which is when we talk about clothing and footwear, prepared meals, cereal inflation, food and beverages. So at all these fronts, we are seeing inflation rising. So in any case, raising the repo rate will not be having an impact on reducing the inflation. So it is better to use the buffer stock and trade policies to tame the food inflation. So in case of wheat, the Food Corporation of India, we've been saying that it is already offloaded roughly 3 million tons of wheat to beat the mandi prices down from about rupees 2,700 to 2 months ago to roughly 2,200 rupees per quintal today. So these needs to be like, these are some of the steps which needs to be taken in order to contain the food prices inflation. So supply side steps would be helping us much instead of increasing the repo rate, because that is not in any way having an impact on the food prices. And for milk, the author is saying that we need to increase the import duty. So in some cases, higher amount of imports can also help in reducing the inflation. And RBI must also have a sigh of relief that none of the top vegetables, which is tomato, onion, and potato, they are giving any trouble. So their inflation is in negative zone right now because we saw a bumper harvest, and basically we are seeing the prices are crashing, which is disturbing for the farmers. So in fact, the onion farmers, they are up in arms protesting against the abnormal drop in the onion prices. So I wish that the government was an active in supporting farmers from dampened prices, as it is about putting a lid on high prices. So in case of onions, also the solution is to help the onion farmer organization set up dehydration units so that in times of glut or large quantities of onions, they are dehydrated and supplied to bulk consumers like the armed forces, hospitals, hostels. So it is important to have adequate amount of storage infrastructure facilities. So in a nutshell, it is time for the RBI to pause and think and resist further hikes in repo rate. Instead, the center must use the buffer stocking, trade, and agro processing policies to keep the food inflation within the tolerance band. So we'll be basically expecting a new and updated form of trade policy as well, because right now the policy that we have in terms of trade is 2015 to 2021, that has been extended. So even again, this article is talking about that there needs to be a pause in the repo rate hike, and any further rate hike will worsen the situation. So this thing has become very important, and obviously RBI needs to think about it. So Monetary Policy Committee, we have talked about that there's a need to decouple from US and the Western world. So MPC, it must focus on the local factors when it meets in April for the next MPC. And so it is important to assess the impacts of the 250 basis points hike in the rate and the effective tightening of 325 basis points since April last year. So it is important to assess the impact of this step, because any which ways it would be impacting the growth rate. So the impact needs to be assessed that for the purpose for which the repo rates were being hiked, whether we have met that purpose or objective or not. So it is saying that the signs are good at the inflation front. In terms of core inflation, it was moderated in Feb to 6.1% from 6.2% in January. So marginal fall, but still it is above 6%. So that is not, we are not in a comfortable situation. And the underlying momentum, that is deaccelerated, although it is taking its time to do so. But when we talk about core inflation, the main problem is its stickiness. So we cannot say the situation or the signs, they are good in a way. And the outlook on the food inflation is also comforting. I don't know why it is written over here. We are seeing in this very article, we talked about the main reasons behind the higher amount of inflation right now is the food inflation. So how is it comfortable? I fail to understand that. Lastly, taking up the Indian Express. So the share of private refiners in fuel exports to Europe is almost 95% in April to Feb. So why the private oil companies they are selling abroad? So private refiners they did not see sense in selling petrol and diesel in the domestic market since they could not match the prices of the state-owned oil companies which have kept retail prices unchanged since April last despite incurring losses. So hence they prioritize the fuel exports for better margins. So that was the main reason. So coming to the editorial page directly, or first we'll be taking up the explained section. So what are the raccoon dogs? So new research has linked this animal to the pandemic. So scientists on Thursday they unveiled new data on possible origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, which put a strange squat creature squarely in the spotlight, which is these raccoon dogs. And the picture is there from the Tokyo's zoo. So the raccoon dog earns its name from its black facial markings, which give the animal a masked appearance and a more than passing resemblance to raccoons. And they were also they were sold at the Hunan seafood wholesale market, where many virologists they suspect that COVID-19 pandemic may have started because of that. So again, this is like not for 100% sure we can say that they were the reason behind the pandemic source. So a sweet export story. So by pivoting to raw sugar exports, India has gone from being a marginal player 5 years ago to number two in the world currently when we talk about raw sugar exports. So we are behind only Brazil. So Brazil it's at number one spot. India is at number two. And specific advantages of Indian raw sugar, it has helped Indian exports. So in this context, it is important for us to know the major sugarcane producing states in India. So, as far as I can recall, one is Maharashtra, that can be one of the top producers of sugarcane in India also. So, looking at the trend of the sugar exports, they have been consistently increased, and India sugar exports in terms of value, even that is increased, except for 2021-22. So building export markets takes efforts, and overseas buyers need to be convinced about the price competitiveness, the quality of the product, and the reliability of the supplies from the exporting countries. And one not so talked about success story in recent years is of sugar exports from India. So this article is focusing upon the sugar exports, and the increase is even more significant in the quantity terms. So that is one thing. So grades of sugar. So here the chart two, it is showing India's exports of both the raw and the white sugar. So raw sugar is what the mills produce after first crystallization of the juice obtained from the crushing of the cane. So this sugar is rough and it is brownish in color, and this is called the raw sugar, and it is processed in refineries for removal of impurities and decolorization. So the end product is what we get as refined white cane sugar, having a standard ICU-MCA value of 45. So the sugar used by industries such as pharmaceuticals, it has the standard of less than 20. So till 2017-18, India hardly exported any raw sugar, and it mainly shipped plantation white sugar of value 100 to 150, and this was referred to as low quality whites in the international market. But right now we are exporting really good quality of raw sugar. So from refined to raw sugar, we have seen a turnaround in terms of the exports. So, mid 2018, a team of officials led by the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution And the industry representatives, they visited Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea, China, and Bangladesh. So their mission was to promote the exports of raw sugar from India. And this was especially in view of the production glut at home, with closing stocks of sugar at 105 in 2017-18, equivalent to 5 months of the domestic consumption. So much of the world sugar trade is in raw sugar only, that are transported in bulk vessels. So India's advantage in raw sugar is that apart from the time window and the freight cost savings, the delegation highlighted two specific advantages of India's raw sugar. So the first one is that it is free of dextran. So dextran is a bacterial compound which is formed when sugarcane stays in the sun for too long after harvesting. So the raw sugar in India, it has no dextran as it is produced from fresh cane crushed within 12 to 24 hours of harvesting. So that is one of the advantages. And second is the Indian mills, they could supply the raw sugar with very high polarization of 98.5 to 99.5%. So polarization, it is the percentage of the sucrose present in raw sugar mass. So the more the polarization, it is only 96 to 98.5 percentage in the raw sugar from Brazil, Thailand, and Australia. So the it is easier and it is cheaper. It is more easier and cheaper to refine it. So the quality of the Indian sugar, the awareness regarding that was created, which has helped in driving the exports. So as I talked about that, when we talk about sugarcane, so Maharashtra is definitely one of the top producing states. And other advantages from sugarcane industry is the production of ethanol, which is also when we talk about fuel blending of ethanol, it can be utilized there. So the government may be concerned about the domestic availability and the food inflation, but the overseas markets lost aren't easy to regain. So it is definitely taken a lot of efforts in increasing the export. So if that is lost, it would be very difficult to regain that share of India, which is right now an achievement for us. And the domestic availability, obviously, that can be easily handled. So what does the ICC's arrest warrant means for Vladimir Putin? So recently on 17th of March, the International Criminal Court had issued warrants of arrest for two individuals in the context of the situation in Ukraine. And firstly, Russia is not a member of the International Criminal Court. So why have these warrants been issued? So according to the press release that was issued by the ICC, President Putin, basically, and one other person, they are allegedly responsible for the war crime of unlawful deportation and unlawful transfer of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. So, this is the reason why an arrest warrant has been issued against them. So what is ICC? It is like headquartered in Hague, which is in Netherlands. So it is an independent judicial body that began functioning on July 1, 2002, when its founding and governing document, that is the Rome Statute, it came into force. So it was established to prosecute the most heinous offenses where a country's own legal machinery failed to act, like in Rwanda and erstwhile Yugoslavia. So, unlike the International Court of Justice, which is ICJ, it deals with countries and international interstate disputes. ICC prosecute individuals. So, it investigates and, where warranted, it tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes of concern to the international community, which includes genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. So, that is the difference between ICJ and ICC. So, does the ICC have the authority to prosecute President Putin? So, the jurisdiction is limited to offenses that occurred after it came into existence on 2002 and not the instances before that. And they were committed either in a country that has ratified the agreement or by a national of a country that has ratified the agreement. So only under these two situations, ICC can act, and Russia is not one of the 123 states which are parties to the Rome Statute that recognize the authority of ICC. So the United States does not either, so even that is not a signatory, and it has over the years repeatedly and aggressively denounced ICC, and neither do China and Russia are a signatory to that. So this is important information. So Kremlin's spokesman has rejected the ICC's warrants as outrageous and unacceptable and said that any decision by the court would be null and void because Russia is not a signatory and even Ukraine is not a state party to the Rome Statute. However, in 2014, the ICC lodged a declaration under Article 12 of the Rome Statute accepting the jurisdiction of the court over alleged crimes committed on its territory from 2013 to 2014, and Article 12, Clause 3, accepting the exercise of jurisdiction of the ICC in relation to the alleged crimes committed on its territory from 20 Feb 2014 onwards, with no end date, was the change that was made. So, Article 12, Clause 3, it allows a non party state to accept the ICC's jurisdiction for a particular crime by means of a declaration. So, that is why the ICC it has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, despite Russia not being a signatory to the agreement. So diplomacy and defense, they are not substitutes for one another. Either alone that would fail. So they are not substitutes. We can say they are complementary. So again, the issue regarding the governors. So institutional safeguards, they are needed to ensure governors, they do not cross the lines which are drawn by the constitution. And it is important for them to, act in accordance to the limitations that are put by the constitution on the governors. So in the ongoing disqualification proceedings against the Maharashtra MLAs in the Supreme Court, CGI heading the 5-judge constitution bench dropped a bombshell with his hard-hitting remarks about the role and the powers of governor. So we had a look at that as well, that he said that it is not basically a governor, whether the question was regarding whether a governor can raise the no confidence motion, or basically can it be admitted when the members who have left a political party, they are basically calling for that no confidence motion. And obviously he said the result is very well known, that it leads to the party which is elected by the people, it leads to it going out of power because of that no confidence motion, which was basically raised as per the demands of the members who had left that political party. So, in the course of the arguments, the CGI severely criticized the Maharashtra's governor's actions and raised questions about the legitimacy and the limits of the governor's role in this case. So CJ observed that the governor should not enter the political arena, adding that a governor cannot enter into any area by which his action would precipitate the fall of the government, and that unless this principle is maintained, it would be very, very serious for our democracy. So these were some of the remarks by CGI. So the crucial issue at hand is regarding the procedural and the constitutional powers which are conferred on a governor. So, what are those powers? So, it is important to have clarity regarding those powers. So, a governor who is expected to be non-partisan cannot function in a way that precipitates a crisis and leads to the toppling of a duly elected government. Furthermore, being an executive appointee, the governor has no role in the legislative issues, and if at all he does, we need to delineate the circumstantial constraints and exceptions that will legitimately allow his interference. So these are very, you can say, clear words coming out from the Indian judiciary. And obviously, in recent years, we have seen that there have been spate of controversies about the governors across the country, from Jharkhand and West Bengal to Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And this issue is basically got into such a worrying level that many governors, they are being called agent provocateur of the center. So we only have to take the very recent case of R.N. Ravi, the Tamil Nadu's governor. Exceeding his powers, he skipped certain parts of his speech, omitting words such as secularism, Periyar, and B.R. Ambedkar. And he made denigrating remarks stating that the Dravidian model is a regressive politics and in gathering of civil aspirants. He advised them that in matters of dispute between center and state, they should always undoubtedly take the side of the center. So these were the words of the governor of Tamil Nadu. So different issues has been mentioned. So Article 192 Clause 2 of the Constitution says that the governor shall act according to such opinion. So the issue in Jharkhand was that the former Jharkhand governor withheld the opinion of the Election Commission in Hemant Soren's Office of Profit case and did not act on it, thereby causing chaos and destabilizing the House. So, in fact, by keeping the Election Commission's verdict a secret, despite repeated requests by both the chief ministers and the ruling UPA, he violated Article 192 of the Constitution, which says that he shall act according to such opinion by which was rendered by the Election Commission of India, but he did not. So he didn't act as per that opinion, and this was obviously violation of the constitution. So these are some of the issues which are going on, and the Justice Sarkaria Commission, which was set up in 1983 to examine the relationship and the balance of power between the state and the central governments, had recommended the following order to be followed by a governor in cases of a hung assembly. So which order needs to be followed by the governor is that: one, an alliance of parties that was formed prior to the elections, so that needs to have the priority. Second would be the single largest party staking a claim to form the government with the support of others and including the independents. Third would be for a post electoral coalition of the parties with all the partners in the coalition joining the government. And fourth would be a post electoral alliance of the parties, with some of the parties in alliance forming the government and remaining parties, including the independents, which are supporting the government from the outside. And 2 decades later, we had the Justice Punchy Commission, which reiterated the recommendations, but successive governments, they have not bothered to take it seriously. So the history, it has shown that constitutional morality and the values, they are too serious to be left to the discretion of the governors, and we must design institutional safeguards to ensure that governors do not cross the Lakshman Rekha. So Sarkaria Commission and the Panchi Commission, they have dealt with the subject at length, and to strengthen our democracy and its federal structure, we need to act, and that too urgently. So here we have seen all these things already. So because of the SVB crisis, the Indian banking sector, it has lost mutual funds to the tune of 6% in just 1 week. So the failure of two US-based banks, they sent the shockwaves across the global financial system and weakened the sentiments in the banking sector in India too, wherein the stocks, the shares, they took a beating. And However, we are not seeing as of kind of really major impact on India or even on Indian startups. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining in Sarkari. And there would be also a PDF, the link of which would be shared in the description box. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and kindly share this video.